Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Masking Emotion panel. How your brain has your back. I am Trust Me I Exist, an artist, streamer, gamer, you name it. I'm a silly little deer on the internet, and while I have zero experience in being a therapist, I have much experience in being in therapy. I'm here to share some of what I've learned.
Hi, I'm Mythix. I'm a creative in several fields of art, from music to illustration, and I've studied many ways to facilitate creativity in oneself. Having a well-guarded mind is a great step towards being able to create freely, and it's why I'm here to share my insight.
Hi, I'm Peahead. I'm a streamer, artist, and mental health advocate working in the field for the past 15 years. I'm getting my counseling qualification and regularly stream about sex positivity and believe that therapy is about the most powerful thing a person can do.
So let's start by setting the scene, space, tone, and some expectations. We'll be learning about masking, trauma, emotions, and a few other topics. While these topics are typically covered within therapy, we are not operating as therapists, and this panel is not a therapy session. We encourage viewers to seek out local resources should they require help, and crisis lines for crisis situations. Examples would include Psychology Today, the Trevor Project, and 988 Lifeline. Please take a break when you need to, as this panel will be available afterwards. To avoid strain on other viewers, please keep commentary positive and light. A reminder will be issued prior to the Q&A section, and a small reminder will remain on the top of the screen. You can see there in white text. Thank you. Masking is representing yourself differently than you otherwise would be. If you've ever kept yourself from cursing, been more cordial than you wished to, or held part of yourself back to meet societal expectation, that's masking. Masking is often given a bad rap, and I've seen people conflate masking with being quote-unquote fake. It's true that masking is utilizing a facade. It isn't done with negative intention. Masking is just an attempt to accommodate those around you.
When masking is used to talk different ways between different crowds, it's also called code switching. Much like how you wouldn't talk to your coworker, you wouldn't talk the same way to a close friend, or we don't have the same conversations with the same people. It's the reason why we don't share our full life story when we're at the grocery checkout. So most everyone participates in this to some degree.
Well, masking is a tool. It can be appropriate and inappropriate depending on its application. You wouldn't use a screwdriver to eat your eggs, and you wouldn't use a knife as a bat scratcher. Ultimately, masking is just an attempt to accommodate those around you, again, and you deserve accommodation too. Like anything, the important part here is moderation. If you always mask, you'll get crushed under how many hats you wear, or even forget that you have a hat at all. You deserve a space to exist and to breathe as your true unmasked self.
Done to an extreme, masking can absolutely harm us or others. You've seen the trope of a character hiding a lethal wound until they collapse, and if masking is feeling like that, there is likely something to it.
Overmasking can also be dangerous. If we have learned to mask to deal with those we feel unsafe around, we can sometimes ignore inner alarm bells and our reactions to them to our detriment.
Trauma's function. Masking is often used to prevent psychological damage, which we typically refer to as trauma. If you've been rejected for being different before, you may fear being quote-unquote different again. This, and masking as a whole, is an example of a defensive behavior. Some of our defensive behaviors are automatic and potentially unconscious, which are usually referred to as defense mechanisms. Rather than demonizing these behaviors, let's have a deeper look and see how they may protect us. For that, though, we will need a special tool, and that's called emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is defined as your ability to perceive, interpret, demonstrate, and control emotion. It may also be your ability to respond to emotion. Effectively, this is your awareness of emotion as a whole. To understand why we behave the way we do when threatened, we have to first understand when and why we feel threatened. Can you tell the difference between embarrassment and a threat? How about fury and hostility? If this is a struggle, I encourage you to take a look at an emotion wheel. Emotion wheels are attempts to map out our basic emotions and their more complicated, nuanced variants. Hurt, threatened, furious, and hostile all fall under anger, for example. An exercise to build this intelligence is to compare your internal definition for an emotion with the external dictionary definition. Start at the interior and work your way outward. Sadness is probably pretty easy, and apathy may be a little bit more difficult. Expanding your emotional vocabulary can greatly improve your ability to articulate and analyze your experience. Then we have the framework to understand what emotions we're feeling. Let's take a brief look at their connotation with positive and negative emotion. Contrary to what we may have been taught by family or in school, or potentially by other people, I like to argue that emotion by itself is neutral. Anger can be helpful, just as happiness can be toxic. Context, moderation, and most importantly, action are crucial. For example, wanting someone's bike is not the same as stealing their bike, and that envy serves to inform us our current form of transportation may just be insufficient.
One of the healthiest things a person can do is reframe this concept of positive or negative emotions. It's our reaction to the emotions that causes damage. Often, trauma survivors struggle with this in particular. Anger arises when boundaries are crossed, boundaries we often need to keep ourselves safe. These emotions have been essential to our survival as a species.
Happiness could be seen as positive, though I doubt many of us would call forced happiness and avoidance of anger healthy. This panel's goal is ultimately to invite a positive regard toward yourself, your emotions, and your thoughts. Maybe you are right to be angry, and maybe you aren't a monster if that isn't the case. We all have moments of weakness, and the first step to change is knowing something was wrong in the first place. You're allowed to feel, and it would be concerning if you didn't. Speaking of our feelings some more, let's have a look at the different ways these feelings can present themselves. I'm sure we've all experienced adrenaline surge in response to a scary situation. This knee-jerk state is sometimes referred to as the quote-unquote hot nervous system. It's our quick fight, flight, fawn response to danger. This works wonders for running from a threat, but it can be problematic if the threat is in our heads. What happens, for example, if we're not really threatened, but instead we're just embarrassed? If that question sounds familiar, that was one of our examples for how emotional intelligence could be useful. Earlier we had the theory, and now we have the application. Once you can realize there isn't really a threat, you can return to your quote-unquote cold nervous system, which is where your more complicated emotions are. An easy way to think about that is that your hot nervous system is your nitrous, and your cold nervous system is your cruise. Now that we've cooled off, we can rationalize the threat appropriately. Hearing all of this logic concerning emotion can encourage attempts to use rationale in place of feeling. However, I like to again remind you of moderation. Even if you know why you're sad, you're still sad. You still have to express that sadness somehow, as it won't go away on its own. This is where the concept of quote-unquote wise mind comes in. Wise mind is the concept of utilizing logic and feeling in equal measure to reach a balance. You'll figure out the reason, if there is one, and express the feeling accordingly. Let's look at an example of wise mind with our mascot, Deer. Deer recently asked to hang out with her friends, but all of them were busy. This makes her feel like her friends don't like her anymore. Now, she uses her logic to say, well, no, they wanted to hang out yesterday, so she isn't hated, she's just lonely. Now she knows not to act defensive as she isn't under attack. Instead, she lets the loneliness wash through her, and maybe she tells her friends she misses them. What could have been a volatile reaction has become a nice reminder she cares. Another concept that may be useful are the quote-unquote parts or subpersonalities of yourself. These subpersonalities are specialists in handling certain aspects of your experience. Some are designed to protect you from rejection or pain. Some are there to remind you of previous experiences or make you aware of memories, and some are dedicated to calming the response from other parts stuck in the past. The ultimate goal of all these parts is to protect you from stimuli. Let's take another look at our mascot. When confronted with uncertainty regarding her friends, part of Deer may remind her of previous experiences with friends that hurt badly. While this can feel unnecessary, the goal of this part is to remind Deer to be careful. This advice may come at a time where it isn't needed, but to that part of Deer, it's better safe than sorry. Not every part of us is so loud, however, and some prefer a polite nudge. In particular, a part that may be difficult to notice is the one that we silenced in place of responsibility. We call this voice the quote-unquote quiet voice, or the quote-unquote inner child. As for many adults, it has been hushed over time to accommodate for adult life. This is the voice of simple desire, and while it may have little regard for responsibility, it is very clear about what we need. Should we abandon responsibility for rest? Maybe not, though that is a great sign we do need to rest soon. As you do look inward, you'll discover a lot of really gnarly feelings or memories, and that's okay. None of us have been perfect, and none of us have experienced a perfect life. You've probably been told that you need to forgive those who have caused you pain. However, forgiveness isn't the only option, and you also have acceptance. You can recognize what happened is over, it wasn't okay, and you're able to move forward now. With all that framework and context, what's the takeaway? You're human. You deserve respect, kindness, patience, and love. The first person you need that from is yourself. And once you can take care of yourself, you can take care of those you want to. Let yourself move one step at a time. Be gentle, change often, and embrace who you are. Listen to yourself, give yourself the space you'd give to your closest friend, and be your best friend. And now, the inspiration and research. For masking, I went to Cleveland Clinic, as it looked like they had their stuff together. For Psychology Today, you can go to Psychology Today. They're a therapist search engine, and what I have personally utilized to find a professional. For trauma, its definition and more in depth, I used mind.org.uk. And for the hot and cold nervous system, I used a publication on the hot and cold cognition and depression. It's a huge paper. You do not need all of the information. It's just the surface level that's important. For the general idea of parts and the hot and cold nervous system, I used Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay C. Gibson. It's a very good book. Part of it does use out-of-date research, so just kind of take it with a grain of salt. But overall, it is a very good piece of information and has a lot of really important concepts that we have covered today in more detail. For emotional intelligence, I used MDPI, which goes more in depth about emotional intelligence and what that means. And then for the IFS or parts section of the panel, I used the IFS Institute, who has a very succinct rundown of what the internal family system's perspective of parts therapy is, what its goals are, and what the different parts of our personalities can be. We will be having a Q&A in the Discord of CozyCon, if the overarching con is still going when you're watching this. So, look for us over there. But before you do, let's again start by setting up some boundaries for the section. This isn't a therapy session, and we are not prepared to help in that capacity. Please don't use this space to trauma dump. And with all that in place, please let us know if you have questions. We'll see you over there. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for watching. I hope you have a fantastic day at the con, and I will see you in the next one.
See you there.
Thanks for coming by.